I have a question right now that I would like to insert here. Is another Hitler rising trying to destroy the Jews?
All right, short break because time flies and we need to talk with Eric more. In the settling of Israel, for one, I know that they were talking about not necessarily having it in Jerusalem. They talked about possibly putting it in Argentina, in different places around the globe. And then the majority of folks that came in and the populations that came in were mostly out of Russia. How does that figure into your cosmology that you're laying out?
Well, according to the prophecies, there has to be a regathering back of the nation of Israel in order that the Messiah might return, in order that the Antichrist would be able to rule the world from the third Hebrew temple in Jerusalem. There has to be a nation. So therefore, it's in the interest of the devil that there be a nation of Israel, and it's also in the interest of the Son of God that there be a nation of Israel. How it happened was that the mystery of iniquity, as the Bible calls it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that the creation of the nation of Israel was not done by patriotic Jews. It was done by traitor Jews, Hofjuden, Jews that were nothing more than the Pope's court Jews, beginning with Theodore Herzl, who had an audience with the Pope in, 1904. So the creation of the nation of Israel was made effectual by the British, because the Jesuits were in control of Britain since no later than King George III, and also made effectual by the United States, in that Harry Truman recognized it in 11 minutes after it declared its independence, and he's a 33rd degree Freemason, absolute papal servant. And then you have Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion, who are also high-level Masons, and they are particular friends with James Jesus Angleton, who was OSS and CIA and a Knight of Malta involved in the Kennedy assassination. So you have all these agents, and Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was trained by Jesuits in Tiflis. He was an absolute Jesuit temporal coadjutor. He was a personal friend of Cardinal Gagnian, who was trained by Jesuits, and really, and his master was Alexander Paskrevishev, who was no doubt a Jesuit and lived in the Kremlin with Stalin. So they were all working together to create the nation of Israel, but also making sure they could kill off true Torah-believing Jews, which was one of the purposes of the Eurasian Holocaust that they brought about.
Yes. Now, why was Israel mostly populated then with Russian Jews? And who are the Khazars?
Number one, the Jews that came into Israel after the war were primarily Polish Jews.
Okay.
Polish communist Jews. Later, only after maybe in the last 20, 30 years, has been Russian Jews, when the Russian Jews have been permitted to leave.
Okay.
The Khazars, I believe the Khazars are not Jews. The Jews, of course, lived in the country of Khazaria, and King Boris did indeed convert to Judaism. But the Khazars have not replaced the historic Hebrew Jewish race, because it is absolutely plain in the Bible that the Jews will be preserved, and that their national identity, their racial identity, will be preserved throughout this entire age, this entire dispensation of grace or present evil age, so that when you talk to any Gentile, the Gentiles know who these racial Jews are, so that they will be persecuted, because that's one of the laws that they have pursuant to Deuteronomy 28, that in their international diaspora, they would be persecuted day and night in every country they went to, until ultimately they would be brought back to their nation, ultimately through a time of Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, and then ultimately repent, believe on the Messiah that they've rejected all these years pursuant to Zechariah 14, and then he will save the house of Judah, and then judge the nations, and then ultimately set up the Davidic kingdom that was promised, which the true Messiah came to establish first.
But before all of that comes, we need to see the third temple assembled,
right,
and to have the Antichrist show up.
And we have to have the rebuilding of Babylon. And that's one of the major purposes for this war. It's a war of annihilation, so that on its ruins, Babylon can be rebuilt, and it will be a huge commercial emporium of the East. It will be the centerpiece of China, Russia, Africa, and we're going to see the destruction of the United States and its financial empire. All that's in New York will be transferred ultimately to Europe, and then ultimately to Babylon.
Let me ask you something. Let's see. You know what? We see that there was a lot of confluence between evangelical Christians and there is the Temple Mount. They call them the Temple Mount cult, but the Temple Mount group who has been trying to lay the cornerstone for years now. Do you think that that there is a sect of Christianity that doesn't see the big picture, that is playing along and into these plans because they really believe that this needs to be built so that the Messiah will come back?
Well, there's no doubt, and I used to be one of them. Most of these people who do believe the Bible thinks that the government of Israel is just wonderful, and that it is a fulfillment of prophecy. They do not understand that the government of Israel is totally controlled by the papacy, and that the rebuilding of the third temple will be done for the benefit of the Pope. Now, there must be a third temple built, as pursuant to Revelation, chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, Daniel chapter 9, and so in Matthew 24. But the true Bible-believing evangelical Christian should be against the government of Israel because it is against the Lord's beloved Hebrew Jewish people who are living there, and that it is completely controlled by the Vatican. But as far as the temple being rebuilt, yes, it will. And one of the purposes for this war, I believe, is so that when the temple is destroyed, when the two mosques on the temple site are destroyed, enabling the third temple to be rebuilt, the American army will be blamed for it. We are going to be blamed for that, and we are going to be blamed for the destruction of Mecca and Medina. Because even as the Jesuits used our CIA intelligence community here to bring down the World Trade Center and blame the Muslims, the Jesuits are going to use their bin Laden construction group and the Al Saud dynasty, which is all Masonic and has High Knights of Malta in it, to bring down Mecca and Medina and blame it on us. And when that happens, there will be war between the West and Islam as long as there a Muslim is alive. And Turkey will be driven onto their side, and which I have said that Turkey will most likely never be brought into the European Union, even though the Pope has promised it will not happen.
Talk about that visit of the Pope going into Turkey. Of all the nations for him to go to, why would he go to Turkey after inflaming Muslim sentiment?
Very good question. Well, Turkey's been controlled by the Jesuits for at least 100 years. The Jesuits got control of the Ottoman Empire, which enabled them to be in command of that empire, and thus caused the Turkish troops to evacuate Jerusalem without firing a shot. And so then Jerusalem fell into the hands of Allenby, and then ultimately it goes into the hands of the Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists, and then ultimately in 1967 they take the Temple Mount. But one of the purposes for the visit of Turkey is to ultimately alienate Turkey from the West and to bring it in on the side of the Muslim nations that will ultimately side with Russia. Remember, the Cold War never ended. Russia is still the Soviet Union. It is still controlled by the KGB under a new name called the FSB.
Yes.
And we see in Bible prophecy that when Russia ultimately invades Israel in the middle of the 7-year tribulation, that there is a nation with her called Togarmah. And Togarmah is Turkey. So there will be an alignment between, and Iran is also with Russia. So there will be an alignment of Iran, of Turkey, of these Muslim nations with Russia in the future, and we should not be surprised if we see that alignment beginning now. And I maintain that this war will go, as Newt Gingrich said and others, anywhere between 30 to 50 years.
Oh, my God.
It's nothing but a papal crusade. Now, Condoleezza Rice said it'd be 20 years. Newt Gingrich said in April of this year it's going to last between 30 to 50 years.
What?
Yes, ma'am. That's why I've advocated never going into Iraq, and that these troops should immediately be brought out. That have 14 bases in Iraq right now. They're building a huge embassy in Baghdad, the biggest embassy I've ever seen. They have long-term plans for Iraq, and one of those plans is the rebuilding of Babylon, which their Jesuit coadjutor Saddam Hussein had been beginning to build. And we also have to remember about Iraq. The Jesuits had been expelled from Iraq in 1969. And this is payback. Any nation that expels the Jesuits can expect agitation, devising of its own people, and then ultimately war, and then ultimately invasion. And this is exactly what Iraq has gotten for the last 40 years.